So suppose that we were asked to find the opposite of an integer. Well, what is the opposite of an integer? Today I'm going to show you what the opposite of an integer is, and I'm going to give a brief recap of absolute value. So an integer is any number that can't be written as a decimal. So I repeat, they can't be written as a decimal. And some examples are -1, 5, and 2000. Now these numbers you can't write as a decimal, but you can write them as a fraction. So -1 would be -1 over 1, 5 could be 5 over 1, and 2000 can be 2000 over 1. Now these fractions aren't fully simplified, but they're still fractions. So that is why an integer is a number that can't be written as a decimal, because they can be written as a fraction. And numbers that aren't integers are -1.3, 3/7, and 2.5. So all these numbers, they can be written as a decimal and a fraction. So what is an integer's opposite? So like we said in the previous slide, an integer is any number that can't be written as a decimal. It can't. So in order to understand the opposite of an integer, we first need to know what absolute value is. So absolute value is just a fancy word for how far away a number is from zero on a number line. So if a number can be shown on a number line, it has absolute value. And absolute value is always positive. Now when a question asks you to find the absolute value, they'll put the number in between two lines. So there's one line here and one line here. So in this question, they're asking you to find the absolute value of x. Now let's practice. So suppose we were asked to find the absolute value of the number 7. So we have a number line, and then we're going to put 0 in the middle, and 7. So absolute value is the distance between 0 and 7. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 7 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7 is 7 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 7 is equal to 7. Now, how does absolute value relate to this topic? So a number's opposite always has the same absolute value. So they're always the same distance from 0 on the number line. So how do you find an opposite? If you add an integer and an opposite, the sum will always be 0. So an easy way to find the opposite of a number is to subtract your integer from 0. So if I was asked to find the opposite of 7, I can subtract 7 from 0. And that is -7. So the opposite of 7 is -7. Now why does this always work? So an easy way to see how this works is to write equations. So suppose that you are asked to find the opposite of the number 3. So like we said before, the two opposites added together are 0. So 3 plus its opposites, we're going to represent that as a question mark, is equal to 0. Now we can subtract 0 from both sides to isolate the question mark. So question mark is equal to 0 minus 3. So then the question mark is equal to 3. And like we said before in the previous slide, to find the opposite of a number, you can subtract it from 0. And we get that equation from this line. So another easy way to find the opposite of an integer is to add a negative sign in front of it. So if I was asked to find the opposite of 7, I can just add a negative sign, so the opposite is -7. Now, suppose I was asked to find the opposite of -7. Well, if you add a negative sign in front of it, you'd get two negative signs. But what are two negative signs? Two negative signs represent a positive sign. So, -7 is equal to +7. So the opposite of negative 7 is 7. So let's practice by finding the opposites of the following integers. So the opposite of 5, we can do 0 minus 5, which is equal to negative 5. Or we could just add a negative sign in front of it, but you'd still get negative 5. Now what about negative 4? Well, if you add a negative sign in front of negative 4, you get positive 4. Or you could just subtract it from 0, and you'd still get 4. And then, if you have 924, we can add a negative sign, get a negative 924. Or we could subtract 924 from 0. So that's a negative 924. So as you can see, no matter what method you use, you'd still get the same answer. So you can just choose what method's easier for you and use that. Now let's work on some word problems. So Marianne and Emily are playing a game. For every math question they get right, they get 1 point. For every question someone gets wrong, they get 1 point taken away. So suppose that Marianne has negative 5 points so far, and Emily has the opposite of negative 5 points. So how many points does Emily have? Well, first we should underline the important information. So we know that Marianne has negative 5 points. And then Emily has the opposite of a negative 5 points. And then we're trying to find how many points Emily has. So we know that Marianne has negative 5 points, and Emily has the opposite of what Marianne has. So we're trying to find the opposite of negative 5. Well, we could use the method where you add a negative sign, and that would be 5. So Emily has 5 points. Now, we could also do 0 minus negative 5 and subtract the number from 0. But no matter what way you use, you will always get the same opposite. Now, Greg just got a new job and has started depositing money in his bank account. His employer deposits $500 in his bank account at the beginning of June. Greg doesn't spend any of that money in June. When July begins, he gets another $500 and deposits it into his bank account. However, by the end of July, he has no money in his bank account. How much money did he spend? Well, that was a lot of information, but we can underline what we know that is important. So his employer deposits $500 in his bank account at the beginning of June. And then Greg doesn't spend any of that money in June. And then when July begins, he gets another $500. And that's in his bank account. But by the end of July, he has no money in his bank account. So how much money did he spend? Well, we know that he got $500 at the beginning of June and didn't spend any of that. So that means that he had $500 at the beginning of July as well, because he didn't spend any of that money in June. And then at the beginning of July, he gets another $500. So you add $500. So that means after he deposits that, he gets $1,000. But then he has no money in his bank account by the end of July. So if you add a number and its opposite, you get $0, which is no money. So we're trying to find the opposite of 1,000. We can subtract 0 minus 1,000, which is equal to negative 1,000. Sorry about that. Now, you can't say that he spent negative $1,000 because when you spend money, it's subtracted from your bank account. So you can just say that he spent $1,000. Okay, that is it for today. Now you should be able to understand the opposite of integers. And if you want to practice more, some practice links will be in the description box below. And feel free to leave a comment below if you have any questions or feedback. And don't forget to like or subscribe. If you do, I'll really appreciate it. And I hope you learned a lot from this video.